I'd like to start out by giving a big hello to all of my friends from Kara, and for anyone else that may randomly wander across this video, my name is Astri, and I'll be showing you a little bit of my digital painting technique. I know the first thing a lot of people are going to notice, and I'd like to just get this out of the way, is there's a ghosty looking reference image behind the painting that I'm working on, and I know the knee-jerk reaction is going to be some people losing their minds and calling me a fake artist or something, but this technique is completely new to me. I started out not even using this program, and I'm kind of using this and getting used to it on this painting because it's so huge in scale and so detailed. It's really just kind of a time saver. A lot of the time, the details are just too vague to even really be super useful. It's more of just like a guideline. It's a silly thing to criticize people for using time-saving tools like this because I could just sit here and trace this whole thing out. It would take ages. It's just kind of a convenience thing. With that out of the way, I'm just gonna be painting this random slab of concrete that's on an underpass here in Tokyo. That's enough rambling. Let's get started. So I am changing the reference picture from day to night, and so I'm having to recalculate all these colors and kind of wrap my head around that. I've already done that on some of the concrete up here, so it saves a little bit of work. I guess another thing I really wanted to touch on quickly is I like to have this screen on the far left open because it shows me the raw painting without the kind of projection behind it. And if you use any kind of tool like this that projects a reference or even like paint directly on top of a reference like I've seen some people do, make sure that you have a way to look at the just raw painting on another monitor or another part of your tablet like this, because it's really easy to trick yourself into thinking that your painting looks a lot better than it does when you're using this sort of a tool. Anyhow, we're just going to start out giving this some nice background. You know, I'm far from a master digital artist, so if I accidentally teach you any bad habits in this video, forgive me. I call myself an art baby because I've only been a digital painter for 4 months now. A little over 4, actually. And so I'm just learning workflows and how to do things. I was doing this with a painfully small brush at first and kind of realized the silliness in my ways. I find things go much more smoothly if I just use a big brush and slam down the background color like this, and then detail on top of it as necessary. One trick to getting this a little bit more exact is using marquees to only paint in certain areas, but I find that going over a little bit and then just kind of going over the areas that it spills over onto with whatever color you're going to use next is much more efficient, but I tend to use a blend of both techniques situationally. I've only used a couple of different software suites, namely Adobe Photoshop, Corel Painter, and Rebelle 7, and I don't know if all of them are this way, but brush strokes are actually pretty fussy in Rebelle and something you have to watch out for. Sloppy brushwork shows, and sometimes your paint will get really blobby and ugly if you have any kind of impasto turned on, like this. And so, nice, smooth brush strokes are definitely preferable. And it's important to pay attention to the direction of your brush strokes also. So we're just gonna keep covering this with the background color, and I know this is probably terribly thrilling. The suspense is gonna keep us all on edge. Okay, so I'm just taking a second to look at the reference here. Gonna need a much smaller brush for these little black cracks. I learned that when you're doing lines like this, to use your whole arm. I've heard a lot of people say that instead of just using your wrist. And it didn't really sink in until I was working on this painting actually for a while and went crazy with my wrist, and then it was so stiff I couldn't really move it too well the next day. And that is when I understood, use your whole arm. I do have some pretty crazy ADHD, so I tend to jump around to different areas in a painting if they're the same value that I'm using, the same color at the moment. But it all comes together in the end, more or less. Missed some paint up there, it seems. Okay, so now that we have most of the background value here, notice that a little bit of the brushwork is kind of, At least on Rebelle, much like a traditional painting, you can also kind of tap your brush along the edges where colors change without doing too much damage to either color. It's a pretty good way to control the paint flow. And now we're going to come in here and grab this rust color. And remember, I'm changing this from day to night, like I said before, so all of the values I'm just going to tone down a little bit situationally. make a nice nasty looking rust streak for our wonderful overpass friend here. There's actually a couple of really good settings called Dirty Brush and Multicolored Brush for a more traditional oil paint feeling. I use those on my cat painting to what I feel like was great effect to make it look a lot more traditional and realistic. Now I noticed there's some slightly lighter values in with this rust. I think I'm just gonna grab the background color and switch to a much smaller brush here. See if I can kind of do a little bit of blending with just the brush. And it doesn't look like it might end up too well. You know, art is all about experimentation to me, especially digital art, since the materials don't cost you an arm and a leg. So we can just try things and kind of see how they end up. And that's really what I've been doing on this whole painting. I've never done a painting of this scale before, so it's all an adventure. Not really sure if I'm liking the effect there that much either, so what I'm going to do, I think, is switch to the blender here and see if I can blend these two colors a little bit more effectively. I think I like the direction this is heading in a little bit more. It's just a really subtle lightening of certain areas, and so it's being kind of difficult to capture. And we don't have to make everything spot on to the reference. I like to where I can, but I also suffer from awful perfectionism. Who knows, that might be how I have some small degree of natural talent at digital art, I guess. So we're just gonna darken that up as usual and kind of find a good brush size. Oh, that went on pretty heavy, didn't it? Actually, I'm gonna turn on Dirty Brush here because I noticed a lot of these have these speckles of the background color showing through, and Dirty Brush just kind of does that on its own, and so it might be a good fit here. You'll see the way the value is applied start to change over time as the brush picks up paint from the canvas and holds it on the bristles, so to speak, in a digital way. And it gives a really nice organic looking mixture of colors that you might find on a rusty, sketchy overpass, for instance. Sometimes it does get a little bit too subtle, but there's a way to fix that. If you just tap on the color again, it'll give you the full pigment back. And there's another value called loading that affects this too, because that's how much paint is on the brush, and so it all of these settings just require a lot of tweaking and experimenting with, and a little bit of reading of the manual never hurts, but it's also fun to just jump right in and play around. That's how I learned Photoshop. I guess I did take a class in high school, but it was about 20 versions ago. That is quite subtle, but I am liking the look of it here a little bit. Whoa, accidentally pulled off a little bit too much of the paint there. So I think I'm gonna come back over to this other area and play around with this a little bit more. See if we can get a little bit of that subtle muddied look going on. Oh wow, that actually looks, now that I look at the raw painting, really close to the effect this has on the reference. Let's add a little bit more blue in and then switch back and see if we can kind of shift the balance of values here a little bit. I really do love this kind of experimentation when painting, just seeing how your actions affect the looks of things. Very relaxing and fun. Okay, so that's looking quite a bit like the reference, and I'm scared that if I keep playing with it, I'm just going to mess it up again, so we're going to let that lie for a moment. And so, yeah, there's a specific way that I've been doing these darker values on this underpass. I already have a tone picked out for it, so I'm just going to go up here and kind of grab that, study the reference. I kind of came up with a method for sort of simulating the differing directions of this concrete on my own as I was painting this, and it's just, of course, using different brush stroke directions. I think it gives it a nice depth, and it looks like this does kind of go two different directions there. Let's see if the paint's running dry. Now it's too dark. I'm just going to turn off Dirty Brush here. It did its job, and now it's being a little bit disruptive. I think one thing that's really important to remember, especially for newer digital artists, is to remember that tools are there to do their job, and sometimes if you can't use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail, I guess is what I'm trying to say, so it's good to not just stubbornly leave a tool on if you don't think it's going well or it's actually disrupting your workflow. Okay, so that looks a little rough. I might have went a little bit too dark on that value, because now that I look at it, I notice it does kind of hit a middle area between the background and the underside color. So I'm just gonna lighten this up a little bit. Yeah, that looks better. And then this darker value kind of around the corner on the front face looks quite a bit darker. I'm trying to be careful to remember that everything is different with the reference because light and shadow from the sun kind of changes the looks of things, but I'm just going to think about that in a second here. Yeah, all of this would be a little bit more shadowy because there would be no sunlight softening the shadows, so maybe leaving it this dark is fine. Boy, I'm not showing off how good of a digital painter I am. This is looking pretty rough so far, but I'm also not making this video to show off, I guess, so it works. But I feel like every painting has kind of an ugly, awkward teenage phase, and then things kind of start to fall together and make sense the more you work on it, and it happens in each area of the painting if it's this complex, so it's okay. I think we'll survive, folks. Taking a closer look at this here. Okay, so this rusty area kind of just fades into the shadow on the underside of the concrete. I'll make this a little darker, make this much smaller. Then we can come in here and kind of paint this other line that's on this, I don't know, drain thing. That's the technical term for it. Okay, that's fine for now. We can come back to that. So yeah, I mean, there's no specific process on how to do these things anyway, and the important thing is that you just relax and have fun while you're creating. Life is too difficult and too hectic as it is without holding yourself to sometimes strange standards and forcing yourself to do things a certain way when you're painting or drawing or doing whatever your medium is. Just have fun. Okay, that looks somewhat like the reference. I see there's this kind of lighter area from the sun reflecting on it on top of this little ledge, and even though there's no sun, I think we are going to use a lighter value there regardless, because we need to demonstrate the dimension of this somehow, and it's a little tricky to do that without either changing the color or the brushstroke direction or something like that. I kind of botched a little and dragged this blue into the rust, so I'll just use the blender tool and fix it there. There we go. And yeah, I mean, this is what's behind the wizard's curtain, so to speak. I'm definitely not a wizard at digital painting. I'm just kind of a silly, misguided art baby, but there's nothing too crazy or nefarious or complicated about the way I paint. It's just I look at references and I do my best to make my painting look like them, and sometimes I don't use a reference at all and I just draw crazy skeletons and hoodies and things like that. I'm trying to rely on references less as time passes, but I mean, it's good to push yourself, but it's also good to kind of maintain some comfort zone when you're learning and growing, I feel like. Okay, this shadow kind of stretches down here, and I'm really deepening the shadows in the areas that they are because, you know, at night, something that's this dark during the daytime would be completely black, essentially. Yeah. This is looking okay so far. Okay, I think I'm gonna just kind of cut the video here. I don't want to bore the entire audience to death with painting some random concrete overhang in Japan, but yeah, it's been nice sharing a little bit of my process with you and the way I think while I'm painting, and I'm certainly planning on making more video content like this because I kind of mentioned this vaguely in a post, but when you're doing a 1,000-hour long painting like this, I can't just sit here and repeatedly post progress pictures and bore you guys to death. And so I wanted to give the people that actually enjoy seeing what I post pretty frequently something to kind of watch if they wanted to without just having to see the same boring, monotonous, barely different screenshots over and over. So yeah, hopefully this was as enjoyable for you as it was for me. And I'll see you on another video at some point in the future, I'm sure. Take care.